This week on Jerusalem Dateline, the Palestinian Authority vows its last cent to pay terrorists who murder Jews. Plus, Hamas ramps up rioting along the Gaza border. And the Trump administration gets high praises for its support of persecuted Christians. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Julie Stahl, filling in for Chris Mitchell. In the face of economic pressure and international criticism, the Palestinian Authority still vows to spend every last penny it has to pay those who murder Jews. Financial support to the terrorist families will continue, despite the United States cutting aid to the PA over the so-called pay-to-slay issue. CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell explains.
The Palestinian Authority says taking care of those who murder Jews is a top priority.
Even if we only have a penny left, it will only be spent on the families of the martyrs and prisoners, and only afterward will it be spent on the rest of the people.
Earlier this year, the United States moved to punish the PA for this policy known as pay-to-slay. It put the Taylor Force Act into effect, which cuts U.S. aid until the PA stops rewarding terrorists and their families. Australia followed suit in July. But the rest of the world has yet to act.
The international community, first of all, has to recognize that the Palestinian Authority paying salaries to terrorists is really a symptom of the fundamental problem. And that is that the Palestinian Authority sees killing Israelis and killing Jews as something heroic.
Itamar Marcus is the founder and director of Palestinian Media Watch. His organization has monitored reports and speeches from the region for more than 20 years.
The Palestinian Authority has put these killers on a pedestal. They've turned them into heroes and role models for the Palestinian people. By now, they can't even back off. They can't even backtrack. They are going to keep rewarding these killers with money that they're getting, to a large extent, from foreign donors.
These posters prepared by his group expose the terrorists and their crimes while laying out the scope of the payments.
You've got Abdallah Barghouti, I would say the most notorious Palestinian Authority mastermind of terror. He built the bombs for suicide bombings in Sparrow Restaurant, Zion Square, Hebrew University, killed Americans, killed Europeans, killed altogether 67 people. He's serving 67 life sentences. These are among the 67 people, and he's already also received about $200,000 already, and he will continue receiving salary, eventually receiving $3,500 a month.
The Taylor Force Act is not only a law, but acts as a symbol as well.
We created a special poster in memory of Taylor Force, an American veteran who was murdered in Tel Aviv. The person who killed him was a terrorist named Bassar Mashalcha, who himself was killed right afterward by Israeli forces. So Bassar Mashalcha's family is now rewarded for life. They received up till now $13,000.
The 2018 budget for rewarding martyrs' families and wounded is nearly $200 million. Marcus says this doesn't bode well for the peace process.
Until the Palestinian Authority changes its ideology and sees murder as murder and sees murder as something punishable, there's no one really to talk to on the Palestinian Authority side.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News.
Israel is stepping up its defenses along the Gaza border in anticipation of yet more violence from Hamas, and has reportedly moved additional Iron Dome anti-rocket batteries into place. Here's more on that story. Israel has been battling Palestinian rioters and fire kites and balloons along the Gaza border since the launch of the so-called Great March of Return in March. The 6-month-old friction peaked in May and June, but since last month, the number of Palestinian rioters attacking the Israeli border surged. The protests have gone from weekly to daily, with up to 20,000 rioters taking part. At a joint press conference with visiting German Chancellor Angela Merkel, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said there are 2 reasons for the trouble with Hamas.
First of all, here is, of course, the permanent effort by Hamas to arm itself and organize against Israel.
The IDF released this footage earlier showing its detonation of explosives that Palestinians hurled or planted along the Gaza border. The IDF said it's now moving additional troops into the area. Netanyahu said Hamas is also attacking Israel because Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas cut funds to Gaza.
The last year, Abu Mazen has made the situation in Gaza more difficult by choking off the flow of funds from the Palestinian Authority to Gaza. As a result of this chokehold, pressures have been created there, and as a result of the pressures, from time to time, Hamas attacks Israel at a relatively low intensity, but the chokehold is tightening.
Hamas leaders say they are ramping up riots to get Israel to accept a ceasefire, but experts say Hamas wants a truce to allow the flow of goods into Gaza to continue to build up its terror infrastructure and then hit Israel when the time is right. It's a tactic the terror group has used in the past. Netanyahu's message was clear.
Hamas thinks that as a result of this plight, it can attack Israel. It will be making a very major mistake. Our response will be harsh, very harsh. I hope that it is possible to halt this strangulation, but I also reiterate that Israel will act with all necessary strength to defend itself and its citizens.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem. Meanwhile, the U.S. is stepping up its stance against Iran. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the United States is terminating a 1955 treaty with Iran. That treaty regulates commerce and diplomacy with a foreign adversary. CBN national security correspondent Eric Rosales has more on the growing tensions between the U.S. and Iran.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo held nothing back when he said the move to terminate the 1955 Treaty of Amity was, quote, 39 years overdue.
Iran is attempting to interfere with the sovereign rights of the United States to take lawful actions necessary to protect our national security. And Iran is abusing the ICJ for political and propaganda purposes.
Pompeo's announcement came after the International Court of Justice ordered the United States to lift some sanctions affecting imports on humanitarian goods and products to Iran. Hours later, National Security Advisor John Bolton announced the U.S. is withdrawing from yet another treaty with Iran, made before the United Nations Court, a court which Bolton says is ineffective.
It's closing doors that shouldn't be open to politicized abuse, which is what we've consistently seen in the ICJ.
Pompeo says the U.S. will continue to provide humanitarian assistance to Iranian refugees, but notes Iran continues to use its money on terrorism.
The choices that are being made inside of Iran today to use money to foment terror around the world, to launch ballistic missiles into airports throughout the Middle East, to arm proxy militias in Iraq and in Syria and in Lebanon, those are dollars that the Iranian leadership is squandering.
So it's a war of words right now. It was a wise move. The U.S. should not let anything impact its sanctions power.
Iran policy experts say this is just another diplomatic full-court press by Iran, using a 1950s treaty to isolate the U.S. today.
If Iran upheld half of the things that the previous governments prior to the revolution agreed to with the U.S. international community, the country would be much better off than it is today.
Pompeo said Iran is clearly worried about the U.S. pressure campaign. President Trump has set a November 4th deadline to impose new sanctions, including sanctions on all oil sales. Eric Rosales, CBN News, Washington.
Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech at the UN in September has continued to reverberate in the Middle East. Just days after Netanyahu exposed secret Hezbollah missile conversion sites in Lebanon, the Lebanese government took diplomats on a tour to supposedly prove he was wrong. Take a look. Lebanon's foreign minister, Gibran Bassil, accused Netanyahu of telling lies about Lebanon to protect himself. But he admitted that Hezbollah does indeed possess the accurate missiles.
It is true that there are many statements made affirming the possession of accurate missiles by Hezbollah. However, this does not mean that those missiles are present in the vicinity of Beirut airport.
Late last month, Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah boasted that his group now possesses highly accurate missiles, despite Israel's attempts to thwart the acquisitions. The Iranian-backed Hezbollah is part of the Lebanese government, but is considered a terrorist organization by the U.S.
In Lebanon, Iran is directing Hezbollah to build secret sites, to convert inaccurate projectiles into precision-guided missiles, missiles that can target deep inside Israel within an accuracy of 10 meters. Hezbollah is deliberately using the innocent people of Beirut as human shields.
Netanyahu listed 3 sites near the airport, one on the waterfront a few blocks from the runway, a second underneath a soccer stadium, and a third adjacent to the airport itself. The IDF released a video at the same time showing the sites. Calling it a diplomatic confrontation, Basile took dozens of ambassadors on tour of the sites. They included the soccer stadium and a walk through a neighborhood that's a Hezbollah stronghold. Netanyahu responded by saying in a statement that Hezbollah is brazenly lying to the international community by means of the fraudulent propaganda tour of the Lebanese foreign minister, who took ambassadors to the soccer field but refrained from taking them to the nearby underground precision missile production facility. Last week, Netanyahu said he had a message for Hezbollah.
Israel also knows what you're doing. Israel knows where you're doing it. And Israel will not let you get away with it.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem. Up next, hear how Middle East Christians view the Trump administration's stand on religious persecution. Born in Egypt, Dr. Michael Youssef became a Christian and later moved to the United States, where he now pastors the Church of the Apostles in Atlanta, Georgia. CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell spoke with Youssef recently in Jerusalem.
Dr. Michael Youssef, of Leading the Way, it's great to see you again.
It is wonderful to see you, Chris.
Dr. Youssef, how would you characterize the difference in the former administration to the Trump administration in relation to their attitude towards Christians here in the Middle East?
The Trump administration, especially under the leadership of Vice President Pence, they made human rights and particularly religious persecution to be a priority. It was never a priority under the Obama administration. He made it clear.
And from your observation, do you see a change in the foreign policy here from the former administration to now? And what difference has that made?
Well, look at the one thing. They're ready to do almost damage to the trade and the economy with Turkey over a pastor. And all of the secular media, without exception, are saying, a pastor? Who cares about a pastor? The trade with Turkey is much more important. The money and the value of the lira is much more important. See, that is exactly what has been happening and I'm talking about Republicans and Democrats. They have numbed our culture into not valuing believers, not valuing Christians, not valuing a pastor. But the Trump administration said, no, a pastor who's falsely accused and is in prison is important to us, and we're willing to put our money where our mouths are, and they're taking a strong stand. Now, the world is watching this. They are not ignoring this. They know that they're going to be next unless they stop persecuting Christians. So for that, I'm very grateful.
Yeah. Same thing with Iran, too. I believe in 2009, millions of Iranians went to the streets. The White House was silent.
Yep.
Here,
the media got support.
They're supporting those that are going to the streets.
Yes, and we pray that they will not give up. And they keep doing what the Egyptians did 5 years ago, and they took to the streets, 30 million of them took to the streets. And eventually the army said, we got to be stewards of the country, not stewards of the president. And they supported them. So I'm hoping the same thing happens in Iran.
Yeah. Do people on the streets know the difference? Do they know Trump is standing with them?
Trust me, they do. I talk with the person in the street because I have relatives there, and there are people in the street, and they do appreciate this more than I can express in words. Even if the leaders kind of speak with forked tongue, and I'm worried and concerned about their own positions, but the people in the streets do, and they value that, and they pray. I've been in prayer meetings with people praying specifically for the administration in the United States.
Coming up, the 12 tribes in art. As many people know, the story of the Jewish people starts with Abraham and eventually grows into the 12 tribes of biblical Israel. One Jerusalem artist is blending the ancient with the modern Israel in her work, After the Tribes. Here's Chris Mitchell.
Artist Beverly Barkat took the soil, sand, and shells from the land of Israel to tell her story of the 12 tribes.
Each one received their own land. Each one had their own specific workplace, what they did, how they did it, and it's all in the paintings of the 12 tribes.
She used soil from each location of the 12 tribes. To this unique palette, Barkat added gemstones represented in the high priest's breastplate. Then she searched for the unique role of each of the tribes.
So when I researched them, like Zvulun, if we go all the way here, Zvulun, on their flag, represented them a ship because they were in commerce. So they went offshore, they were sailors.
Barkat says the Torah provided them much influence.
They studied the Bible. They actually came up with realizing that the moon starts very thin and goes throughout the month, and at the end of the month it's big and then it starts thin again. And that dynamic of knowing how the moon moves and holidays, Hebrew, Jewish holidays, the interaction with religion, they brought that to the table.
Her word led Barkat to see a connection between the ancient tribes and today's Jewish state.
And that's what's so special about each tribe and tribe, that they had their specialty that they brought to this one whole thing called Israel today.
While the 12 tribes spread throughout the Promised Land, Jerusalem brought them all together.
And then they go back to Jerusalem. Oh wow, new ideas, new speculations, new spices. So that tapestry of spread out all over is actually what I feel exists today.
Barkat is married to Jerusalem Mayor Nir Barkat, who has led the city for nearly a decade.
I do know that he's changed Jerusalem around, that he's created hope for everyone, and he's done it in a way that he taught me about the 12 tribes in Jerusalem.
Barkat hopes her work reflects the uniqueness of today's Israel.
You can walk around today in Israel and you can taste in the restaurants new, innovative tastes, the way of cooking, the way of high-tech, innovative. And that's the dynamic aspect of what I wanted to create here, is that you really feel the dynamic way of living.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Still ahead, see how Christians helped a Jewish family after they fled the war in their native Ukraine. Immigrating to Israel can be challenging, especially when you're fleeing for your life. Take a look at how Christians stepped in to help this family.
Valeria and her little sister hid in the bathroom as gunfire erupted outside their home in eastern Ukraine.
We saw men shooting at each other in our yard right outside the window. They were yelling and we heard loud explosions. I was so scared and my sister kept crying. I just closed my eyes.
I held my daughters for 2 hours in the bathroom, waiting for the violence to end. It was total chaos, with cannons and rocket fire getting closer and closer to the house. Our home was on the front lines.
Fighting between Ukrainian and pro-Russian forces continued for months as the family tried to endure.
I saw a little girl on a stretcher. One of her legs was blown off in an explosion. She looked just like Valeria, and that scared me.
They knew they couldn't stay in Ukraine any longer. Because the family is Jewish, they made plans to flee to Israel.
We left everything behind, including our jobs. We didn't know the language or how we would make ends meet in Israel.
Then in her Hebrew class, Olga was told about CBN Israel. We made sure the family had food to eat. We also got them furniture, bedding, dishes, and some clothes for the girls.
We are so grateful for CBN Israel. You ensured that my daughters were taken care of and that our family could start over.
Olga and her husband eventually got jobs working in a restaurant. Thanks to CBN Israel, the family got the help they needed during that difficult time, and now they have a new beginning.
Your support is so important for people like us who've lost everything. You encouraged and inspired us.
You are doing amazing things to help others. I want to be like you and help others in the future too. Thank you very much.
That's all for this edition. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And remember, the God who's watching over Israel and you and me neither slumbers nor sleeps. I'm Julie Stahl. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.